There's a strange appeal to hiking alone. I don't know if it's the quiet or the way I can move at my own pace, but being alone on a trail just feels freeing. One October morning, I was hiking a remote trail in Colorado. The forest was painted in shades of red, orange, and yellow, so vibrant it almost didn't feel real. But what stuck out the most was the silence. No wind, no distant chatter from other hikers, just me and the crunch of leaves beneath my boots. It was peaceful, yet eerily still. I'd been walking for an hour or so when something unusual caught my eye, a narrow side trail, half hidden by the thick underbrush. It didn't look like a marked path. If anything, it seemed like it had been forgotten. I hesitated, but there was something oddly inviting about it, like it wanted to be found. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow it. As I pushed my way through, the trees seemed to crowd closer together, blocking out most of the sunlight. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. Even the birds stopped chirping. Eventually, I found myself in a small clearing, and that's when I noticed something that made me stop dead in my tracks. In the center of the clearing was an old, rusted tent, half buried under layers of dirt and dead leaves. It looked as if it had been left there for years. Something about it felt wrong. Like it didn't belong. I took a few cautious steps toward it, my heart pounding harder with each step. That's when I noticed a small notebook hanging from a nearby tree branch, its pages yellowed and weathered from the elements. I reached up and took it down, flipping it open. The writing was shaky, scrawled out as if the person had been in a hurry, or terrified. As I skimmed through, a pattern emerged, entries documenting the days of a lone camper who had started to feel like something was watching them at night. The first few entries were just notes on the sounds they'd heard, twigs snapping, leaves rustling. But the further I read, the more frantic the entries became, describing shadows moving just beyond the firelight, and footsteps pacing around their tent. The last entry made my skin crawl. The writing was erratic, barely legible. It only said 3 words: "It's here. Run." At that moment, the silence around me seemed to grow heavier, pressing in on me from all sides. A strange, suffocating feeling settled over me, and I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched. My heart thudded painfully in my chest as I slowly looked around, scanning the trees for, I don't know what. But I could feel it, somewhere just beyond my line of sight. Then, I heard it. A soft crunch, like a foot pressing down on dry leaves. The sound was too deliberate to be an animal. My eyes darted around the clearing, but there was no sign of anyone else. Another crunch, this time closer. My instincts kicked in, and I turned, moving quickly back toward where I thought the main trail was. But the path I'd come from looked different, the trees and underbrush denser, almost as if they were closing in around me. My walk turned into a jog, and then a full sprint, my pulse racing with every step. But no matter how fast I ran, I could hear those footsteps right behind me, always close, but never close enough for me to see what was following me. The worst part was, the more I ran, the less familiar my surroundings became. It was like the trail was rearranging itself, intentionally leading me away from safety. Then, I heard it. A soft crunch, like a foot pressing down on dry leaves. The sound was too deliberate to be an animal. My eyes darted around the clearing, but there was no sign of anyone else. Another crunch, this time closer. My instincts kicked in, and I turned, moving quickly back toward where I thought the main trail was. But the path I'd come from looked different, the trees and underbrush denser, almost as if they were closing in around me. I didn't wait around to see if it would come back. I just walked as fast as I could back to my car, every shadow along the way making my heart skip a beat. Even now, when I'm out in the woods, I can't shake the feeling that the trail I found is still out there somewhere, waiting for the next hiker curious enough to wander off the beaten path. It was supposed to be a relaxing 2-day camping and hiking trip with a few friends. We'd picked a remote spot in Montana, far from any main trail, so we could enjoy nature without distractions. The first day was amazing. We hiked through dense forests, scaling rugged hillsides and walking beside crystal-clear rivers where you could see every pebble at the bottom. By late afternoon, we found a small clearing near the forest edge to set up camp. We started a fire, cooked a simple meal, and talked under the stars. It felt perfect, almost too perfect. Around midnight, as we were winding down, we heard something strange, footsteps coming from deeper within the forest. At first, they were faint, almost blending into the sounds of the woods. We paused, listening intently as the footsteps grew more pronounced, moving slowly but steadily toward us. One of my friends, Mike, laughed it off, saying it was probably just a deer or maybe a stray hiker who got lost. I tried to brush it off too, but something about it didn't feel right. Eventually, we went to our tents, trying to sleep off the unease. But a few hours later, just as I'd finally drifted off, I woke up suddenly to a strange, overpowering smell, a thick, earthy odor like wet dirt and rotting leaves, mixed with something metallic, almost like rust. The smell was so strong that I could barely breathe. Outside my tent, just beyond the firelight, I saw a figure standing by the fire pit. I froze, my heart pounding as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. It looked like a man, but there was something off about him. He was too thin, his clothes tattered, and his movements, they were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet being moved by invisible strings. I was terrified, but I couldn't stop watching as he moved closer to the fire pit, stopping just at the edge of the light. I wanted to wake the others, to shout, but fear kept me silent. And then, in one chilling instant, he turned his head toward my tent, almost mechanically, like he'd just noticed me watching him. His eyes were hollow, empty, like he was looking through me, not at me. Then, in a low, raspy voice, he whispered my name, drawing it out slowly, as though he'd learned it by listening to us talk. Ethan. His voice had an unnatural quality to it, like a recording that's been warped. He repeated my name over and over, each time a little softer, a little more distorted, like he was savoring the sound of it. My skin went ice cold. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, my mind screaming at me to do something, anything, but I couldn't even breathe. After what felt like an eternity, he finally stopped and turned, shuffling away into the darkness, disappearing into the trees. I lay there, paralyzed, until the first light of dawn started to creep over the forest. When I finally got up, I stumbled out of my tent and told my friends what I'd seen. They were skeptical, laughing it off as just a nightmare brought on by too much campfire horror talk. But then we noticed something that made everyone fall silent. Just beyond the fire pit, where the figure had been standing, were deep footprints in the dirt, circling our campsite as if he'd been watching us all night. The prints led back into the forest, disappearing between the trees, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was still out there, watching and waiting for us to come back. Last summer, I was on a solo hike through a remote canyon on the Arizona-Utah border. I'd picked it because of its remoteness, wanting to experience the vast beauty without another soul around. It was the kind of place that felt timeless, with towering red rock formations shaped by centuries of wind and water, the only sounds the whisper of the breeze and the crunch of my boots against stone. The isolation was exhilarating but also a little unnerving. Around noon, as I was tackling a steep incline, I noticed an odd sound. It was faint at first, just a high-pitched, rhythmic noise echoing down through the canyon. At first, I thought it was the wind whistling through the rocks, but as I climbed higher, the sound grew clearer. It was subtle, but it almost sounded like someone calling my name. I stopped, listening carefully. There it was again, an eerie echo bouncing off the canyon walls, my name, but in my own voice, as if some part of me were calling out from high above. I tried to shake it off, chalking it up to the strange acoustics out here. But even as I continued, the sound stayed with me, repeating every few steps. It was unnerving, to say the least, and I couldn't ignore the uncomfortable weight settling in my chest. Quickening my pace, I kept climbing, hoping to get to the top of the ridge to see if someone, anyone, might be there. But as I finally reached the summit, the sound cut off, leaving only dead silence. I looked around, taking in the barren expanse of rock stretching for miles. No movement, no one else in sight. Just me and an overwhelming emptiness. I almost laughed, thinking I'd psyched myself out. But just as I turned to start my descent, I heard it again, this time louder, closer, echoing from somewhere behind me. My heart pounded as I scanned the rocks, and that's when I noticed a narrow formation casting a long, dark shadow on the ground. The shadow seemed to shift, a subtle movement that caught my eye. It was almost like something was crouched within it, a shape crawling just out of sight. Before I could get a closer look, I felt a strong, sudden tug on my backpack, as if some unseen hand had yanked me back. I lost my footing and tumbled down the incline, scraping my arms against the rough stone as I tried to break my fall. When I finally stopped sliding, I lay there, gasping, my heart racing. I scrambled to my feet, looking around, but everything was silent again. No shadow, no echo of my voice, just the canyon stretching endlessly around me, swallowing the sound of my own breathing. When I finally stopped sliding, I lay there, gasping, my heart racing. I scrambled to my feet, looking around, but everything was silent again. No shadow, no echo of my voice, just the canyon stretching endlessly around me, swallowing the sound of my own breathing. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that canyon. Maybe it was just the acoustics playing tricks on me, but every time I hear an echo, I'm right back there, listening to my own voice calling out from somewhere beyond reach, like something out there in the cliffs is still waiting for me to answer back.